At the beginning of 1972, 9-year-old Deborah Lynn Randall was a third grader at Pine Forest Elementary School and living with her family in Marietta, Georgia. She loved playing with dolls, but was also known as the queen of her neighborhood baseball team. Her favorite person to play baseball with was Melvin, one of her two older brothers. On January 13, 1972, 10-year-old Melvin was feeling sick. His mother, Juanita, was also not feeling well and had asked Melvin and Debbie to take the family's laundry to the Duds and Suds laundromat half a block away from their apartment building. Melvin did not want to go because he did not feel well, and his favorite television show was on. Therefore, Debbie and her stepfather, Frank, were the two people who went to the laundromat. Debbie put on a new pair of lavender shoes she had just gotten for Christmas and left home with Frank and the family's laundry. Debbie liked going to the laundromat because she had fun playing there. She would stack up empty detergent boxes or bring her Barbie dolls and play with other girls from the neighborhood there. When she and Frank arrived at the laundromat, Frank started loads of laundry in two machines. He then gave Debbie the change she would need to switch out the laundry once those loads finished and went home. Debbie's family expected that she would come home asking for help bringing home the laundry by 7:30. When she did not, they became concerned, especially since it was getting dark. Juanita and Frank went to the laundromat to check on her and found a spilled box of detergent on the ground near a Volkswagen parked outside of the laundromat, roughly 85 feet away from its door. Debbie was nowhere to be found. According to some girls who had been folding laundry at the laundromat, Debbie had gone outside at 7:15, telling them goodbye as she left. It soon became apparent that Debbie had been abducted. Debbie's father, John, was notified while he was at his job at the Ford Motor Company plant. The Marietta police were called, and they found small fingerprints on the Volkswagen, smudged in a downward direction. Witnesses reported seeing a dark 1950s pickup truck speeding away from the area of the laundromat and driving erratically. Police eventually learned that a 12-year-old girl witnessed the actual abduction. She had not reported it immediately because she believed the little girl she saw a man grab must have been his child, who had misbehaved and was being taken home. The man nearly ran her over as he sped away, and she could briefly see him glaring back at her in the truck's rearview mirror as he drove away. Another witness saw a man driving a pickup truck similar to the one later seen speeding away from the scene around 7 p.m., as it parked next to the Volkswagen where child-sized fingerprints were later found. These two witnesses were able to help develop a sketch of the driver. The official search for Debbie involved the Marietta Police Department, the Cobb County Police, and the Cobb County Sheriff's Office. In addition, the people of Marietta joined together to launch Operation Debbie, a massive search effort looking for the little girl. More than 4,000 people were ultimately involved in the search. Among the volunteers were civil defense workers, ham radio operators, and students. One of the most dedicated volunteers was Melvin Randall, who would struggle with guilt for several years over being sick and not going to the laundromat with his little sister the day she disappeared. He went door to door, speaking with all of his neighbors, and distributed flyers throughout the neighborhood, desperately hoping his efforts would bring Debbie home. January 29th, 16 days after Debbie disappeared, was cold and rainy, but the volunteers continued their work. A group of students from Southern Tech were searching a heavily wooded area between Windy Hill Road and the Fox Hill subdivision on Powers Ferry Road. Mike McCahan had enrolled in the school after serving with the military in Vietnam. He had been searching for several hours when he came across drag marks in the dirt around 5 p.m. When he followed them, he discovered Debbie's lifeless body. She was fully clothed, but had only her socks on her feet. Her prized lavender shoes were gone. Most of Marietta seemed to show up to honor Debbie's memory at her funeral. Thousands of people were packed into Roswell Street Baptist Church for the service. Debbie was then buried at Kenneth Stone Memorial Park. Debbie's body was found approximately 6 miles away from where she was abducted. Dr. Larry Howard of the Georgia State Crime Lab examined Debbie's body and determined that she had been raped. The most recent statements from authorities say that Debbie's cause of death was strangulation, but earlier ones state that she had been suffocated. It has been reported that Dr. Howard believed that Debbie died as the result of her killer using her coat to cover her face in an effort to muffle her screams while he raped her. A geologist was brought into the investigation to analyze dirt samples taken from Debbie's clothing. They identified dirt from 2 different locations, one from where Debbie's body was found, and another ultimately matched to clay from the Dixie Cast and Stone Company on Powers Ferry Road, some 3 miles away from where Debbie's body was found. This led investigators to believe that Debbie was killed on the Stone Company property, and that her body had then been dumped in the wooded area where it had been found. Brown hair was also found on Debbie's body, and the lab determined that it came from a white male, most likely between the ages of 18 and 30. Police conducted numerous interviews and followed up on hundreds of leads, but Debbie's killer remained unidentified. The death of Debbie and the lack of punishment for her killer obviously took a massive toll on her family. She was my baby, and I loved her so much. I couldn't understand why it was her instead of me. It was the way she had to go that hurt me so bad, and it still hurts. I would at least like to know who done it before I pass away, Debbie's mother, Juanita, said in July of 2018 as she battled leukemia. Juanita, unfortunately, did not get her wish to live to see her daughter's killer identified. She passed away on September 17, 2018. In accordance with her wishes, her ashes were buried alongside Debbie's body. Describing what losing Debbie felt like to reporter Jessica Knoll in 2018, Debbie's father, John, tearfully said, "Somebody took my baby. It tears you up, literally tears you up. I was like a zombie around here for a while. It's just like taking a big chunk out of your body. When I found that out, it was just like losing a part of me being gone. It was gone, and it ain't never come back, and never will it come back." John participated in the interview with Jessica Knoll because he still hoped to live to see Debbie's killer brought to justice. He believed there were people who had information on the case, and he did the interview in hopes of one of them seeing it and coming forward. He believed that if Debbie's killer was still alive and could be prosecuted, he should be executed following his conviction, because he obviously was not sorry for what he had done, as evidenced by the fact that he had never come forward. Like his ex-wife, John died without ever seeing justice for his daughter. He passed away in January of 2022, just 3 days before the 50th anniversary of Debbie's murder. While he was not alive to see it, Debbie's case would finally be solved the very next year. By the times of their deaths, Debbie's parents at least knew that police were still looking for their daughter's killer, and that technology that had not yet been available at the time of Debbie's murder was being used to hopefully solve the case. Luckily, the original investigators assigned to Debbie's case had preserved the evidence from the case very well, what would prove to be the 2 most useful pieces of evidence in the age of DNA testing: the hair found on Debbie's body and a small piece of cloth found next to her body were preserved well enough to still be usable for testing, even decades after Debbie's death. In 2001, the FBI conducted testing on the hair. They could not identify Debbie's killer, but the testing did narrow the suspect pool considerably. The case was handed over to the Cobb County Cold Case Unit in 2015. That same year, the evidence in the case was sent for more DNA testing. A partial male profile was developed, but a match to it could not be found in the combined DNA index system. Investigators with the Cold Case Unit developed several strong suspects, but each was ultimately excluded by DNA. Thanks to extra funding received in 2019, further advanced DNA testing was conducted on the cloth in 2022. A familial DNA profile was developed, and investigators used genetic genealogy to search for potential suspects. The Cobb County Cold Case Unit began working with DNA Labs International in 2023. They were able to identify several relatives of the contributor of the DNA from the cloth. When authorities contacted these relatives, They agreed to provide samples of their DNA. Comparing their DNA with the DNA from the cloth helped give investigators a better idea of how each one of them was related to Debbie's killer. The potential suspect, ultimately identified by this effort, was deceased. In order to be absolutely sure about the identification, authorities had his body exhumed so that samples could be taken for direct DNA testing. This testing confirmed his DNA was a match to that from the crime scene. On September 18, 2023, Cobb County District Attorney Flynn D. Brody Jr. announced that Debbie's killer had been identified as William B. Rose, who had been 24 years old at the time of the murder. Rose could not be arrested because he took his own life in 1974, 2 years after Debbie was killed. Cold case investigator Roy Alter stated at the press conference announcing Rose's identification that he suspected Rose may have ended his life because he was afraid of being caught for Debbie's murder. According to Mr. Alter's conversations with Rose's family members, Rose had been worried about going to jail prior to his death, but his family had assumed his concerns stemmed from minor incidents. Rose did have a criminal record, but had only ever been arrested for alcohol-related incidents. He had not previously been a suspect in the case. It does not appear that Rose knew Debbie prior to her abduction. However, he did have relatives who lived in her apartment complex, giving him a reason to be a regular visitor there. He may have seen her playing outside during prior visits to the complex, but her murder appears to have been a crime of opportunity. Debbie's brother Melvin was present at the press conference to express his gratitude for investigators and their ongoing efforts. He was relieved both because he finally knew who took his sister from him, and because her killer was not someone his family knew. Melvin had ultimately resolved the guilt he had once felt for not being with Debbie at the laundromat that day, and he has stated that he does not hate Rose, despite what he did to his sister, because he had learned over the years that hating someone would do him no good. Melvin expressed sympathy towards Rose's family for the difficult time he knows they must be going through as a result of this news. Rose's identification was somewhat bittersweet for Melvin because his mother did not get to see it. However, he stated, "I wish my mother was here, but I know she knows in heaven that it's finally over."